affordable product. No. Talking about stuff that we can sell to others to pay for our lifestyle. We don't produce anymore. Manufacturing employment in the U.S. computer industry, that should be an exception, shouldn't it? It's actually lower in 2010 than it was in 1975. That shocked me to discover. The United States has lost a total of about 5.5 million manufacturing jobs since October 2000. Dell, most of you know Dell is one of America's largest manufacturers of computers, has announced plans to dramatically expand its operations in China. It will make an investment estimated to be over $100 billion during the next decade in China. They closed their last large U.S. manufacturing facility in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, this last November. Approximately 900 jobs were lost there. Are they going to return? No. See, the question that's lurking here, will the jobs return? Because unless the jobs return, this economy won't turn around. It'll superficially make it look like it's turning around. It's not really turning around. As of the end of July, the U.S. trade deficit with China had risen 18% compared to 1 year prior. 18% in 1 year, the trade deficit. According to a new study conducted by the Economic Policy Institute, if the U.S. trade deficit with China continues to increase at its current rate, the U.S. economy will lose over 500,000 jobs this year alone, yet not counted. The U.S. Census Bureau says that 43.6 million Americans are now living in poverty, with 42.9 million on food stamps. This is America we're talking about. I thought we were the richest, strongest country, but we all believe that, feel it, presume that. No, that's an error in our assessment. According to them, the U.S. Census Bureau is the highest number of poor Americans in the 51 years they've been taking tracking the data. Well, what are we doing here to resolve all this? Quantitative easing. Boy, that isn't a very decorated lie. Quantitative easing? What are you talking about? Reducing the value of the dollar. That means stealing from you. That's an invisible tax. Lowering the value of it. Over the past 3 years, 3.3 trillion, not billion, trillion in bailouts, stimulus, quantitative easing is the current fashionable term, has been pouring into what? The big banks and Wall Street, the multinationals, and get this, into the campaign funds of their collaborators in Congress. The corruption in America is staggering.
It is.
I remember I sat on the board with William Simon, former Secretary of Treasury. He wrote a book called Time to Truth. And because we were on a board together, we shared with his book, of course. And I was startled to realize when he was Secretary of Treasury, he recognized that the United States is irrevocably out of control. Way back then. And we're seeing it really come home to roost today. The worst day for Americans in 2011 will be the day that the dollar is vetoed as the world's reserve currency. Because when the world it's no longer the reserve world. See, I didn't realize it when you think it through. When that happens, the Fed can't just print money anymore. Because it becomes worthless like going over a cliff. When the Federal Reserve can no longer simply print more money to bail out private institutions and pay its debts, the cost of everything, especially oil, will escalate. Non-linear. The U.S. is not immune to the results of its current fiscal policies. The policies that are going on are insane. The astonishing thing in Europe, under the leadership of Europe, as they look at Wall Street as well as Washington, is the way they act. It's not the decisions, it's the way they act. It's business as usual. They have no apparent grasp of the precipice that they're driving over. Now, is this a 6-month thing? Is it a 3-year thing? I don't know. But it's not a distant, long-term trend. No, it's a precipice view. What is the greatest source of pain? Someone suggested in some recent writings. The subprime mortgage disaster that we went through a couple years ago, the housing bust, the banking crisis, the collapse of General Motors. No, there's a bigger one than that coming. The collapse of the Treasury. You're kidding. No, I'm not. Mark Weiss, who has one of the widest collection of advisory services, points out the Treasury's financial crisis loomed so large it could wreak more havoc on the economy and deliver more pain to the average American then the subprime mortgages, that's the housing bust, the main crisis, all the rest put together. You've probably seen these charts in the press and so forth, which talk about the bailouts and all of that. It isn't one, by the way, it's a whole list of these things. And they say that there's 13 trillion of these bailouts. That's a lie, too. That's a lie, like over 100% wrong. It's twice that. But that's the typical number you get bandied about. There is a special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program, the TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, the TARP program, you probably read about. And this is a quote from their quarterly report. You go through all these numbers, you discover that the number down there, in the lower right-hand corner, isn't 13 trillion, it's 23.7 trillion. But we're not through yet. There are actually 50 different initiatives that have passed by the Congress dumping money at special groups for political payoffs, and eventually it's back in the coffers of the guys doing the money. More than 23.7 trillion. And we could go through all these debts, and you see numbers like 52 trillion. That isn't the end of it. Because you add to that the unfunded obligations, like Social Security, Medicare, that's another 65 trillion, that's with the T. And on top of that, the banks are sitting on derivatives of 200 trillion. It doesn't take a genius to realize these are numbers that will never be met. Remember the difference between billion and trillion? The difference between 32 years and 32,000 years? These are black numbers. A highly respected observer, Professor Lawrence from Boston University economist, very widely respected, and quoted the IMF Monthly Journal on Finance and Development, says, government debt is not 13.5 trillion, common number, but 14 times higher, at 200 trillion. He's talking about the government debt, by the way. He hadn't added the other 200 trillion. That's 840 times what we earn total a year. He says, let's get real. The U.S. is bankrupt. Now, the people that we depend on lending us the money aren't stupid. They know this, and they're starting to make moves. China is beginning to back away from the dollar. Go to Singapore and try to give somebody a $100 bill, they won't take it. You want no U.S. words? No, disregard it. Now, this debt crisis is now beginning, is impacting nearly half of all the U.S. states and thousands of our counties, cities, and towns. All over America, critical services are already being eliminated. Police, fire, other emergency services are being cut. Health care services are being limited or eliminated altogether. Schools and universities are losing funding and being forced to raise the tuition costs. Maintenance of roads, bridges, and even electrical grids is being curtailed. Thousands of state, county, and city jobs are being cut. And to add insult to injury, state and local taxes are being raised. All because the state and locals can't pay their bills. State of Illinois is broke already. The police are not being paid. What does that mean? California is in big trouble, as you will know. Still, prominent Wall Street analysts are now warning that up to 100 major U.S. cities and states will go bust in this year. In this year. Now, the last 100 years, this kind of problem is not unique. It's happened in the past in Germany, Russia, Austria, Poland, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Poland, and Ukraine, Japan, and China. So this is not a phenomenon. In every one of these cases, it's resulted in a total regime change. What does that mean? You don't know. Hyperinflations have been all through history. The best known one, of course, is Germany. From 1919, and this is very graphic to me because my grandparents sold the rest of it to retire during that period. When the escrow opened, the money they were expecting was enough to retire on. When the escrow closed, what they got was enough to buy a loaf of bread. You see, in those days, food prices doubled every 49 hours. A loaf of bread in 1920 cost 1 mark, and in 1923, 726 million marks. You and I can't grasp those kinds of things, and I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying what's happening is non-linear, not predictable. Let's just take one element, that's cheap oil. Access to cheap oil has been America's gift of owning the world's reserve currency, because we own the reserve currency, plus the non-Asian dollars, and we get it cheap. When